The morning sun was just beginning to cast its warm glow over the bustling city streets. People hurried to catch buses, their minds occupied with the day ahead. Among them was Marcus, a quiet, hard-working man who had grown used to the challenges life threw his way. He boarded the bus, his usual calm demeanor intact, ready to face another ordinary day. But what happened next would be anything but ordinary. As the bus driver glanced in Marcus's direction, his expression shifted, and a cold tension filled the air. Without warning, the driver began hurling harsh words, his voice loud enough to catch the attention of other passengers. Marcus, though stunned, chose to remain composed, offering no retaliation. He simply asked the driver why he was being treated so unfairly. But the driver's temper flared even more. In a shocking moment of aggression, he lashed out and punched Marcus. Gasps echoed through the bus as passengers froze, disbelief and fear etched on their faces. Marcus stumbled but kept his balance, his calm resilience in the face of violence leaving an impression on everyone around him. The situation took an unexpected turn when the bus came to a screeching halt at a traffic light. Unbeknownst to the driver, a police officer stationed nearby had seen the entire incident unfold. With a firm knock on the bus door, the officer stepped aboard, his presence demanding immediate attention. The driver's smug confidence quickly faded as the officer asked passengers what had happened. The truth spilled out in a wave of voices, each account aligning with what the officer had witnessed. Suddenly, the tables turned, and the driver realized he was the one in trouble. As the officer escorted the driver off the bus, a quiet murmur of relief spread among the passengers. Marcus stood tall, his dignity intact, as passengers offered words of support and solidarity. What had started as a moment of injustice transformed into a powerful reminder that actions have consequences, and that there's always someone watching. The driver, now facing legal repercussions, learned the hard way that treating others with respect isn't optional. It's essential. Meanwhile, Marcus's quiet strength became a source of inspiration for those who witnessed the event, proving that even in the face of adversity, grace and integrity can shine brighter than anger and hatred. Marcus sat down on a nearby bench after stepping off the bus, his mind racing. The incident replayed over and over in his head. The driver's anger, the punch, the police officer's intervention. He could still feel the sting on his cheek, though the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional weight he carried. How could something so cruel and unprovoked happen in the middle of a busy street, surrounded by so many people? As he rubbed his sore jaw, Marcus noticed a woman from the bus walking toward him. She was in her late 30s, dressed in a simple navy blouse and jeans, her face filled with concern. "Hey," she said softly, sitting down beside him. "Are you okay?" That was intense. Marcus nodded, forcing a small smile. "I'll be fine." It's not the first time I've dealt with something like this, unfortunately. The woman's eyes widened slightly, a mix of sympathy and disbelief crossing her face. "I'm sorry you've had to deal with anything like that at all," she said firmly. "No one deserves to be treated like that. What's your name?" "Marcus," he replied. "And you?" "Leah," she said, extending her hand. He shook it, appreciating her kindness. Lee hesitated before speaking again. "I know it's not my business, but you handled that situation so calmly. I don't know if I could have done the same in your shoes." Marcus chuckled dryly, though there was no humor in it. It's not about wanting to stay calm. Sometimes you just have to. If I reacted the way he wanted me to, it wouldn't have ended well for me. Leah nodded, understanding the unspoken weight behind his words. She'd seen the way the driver had looked at Marcus, the venom in his eyes. It wasn't just anger. It was something deeper, uglier. As they talked, the police officer from earlier approached them, his expression serious but not unkind. "Mr. Marcus, right?" he asked, holding a small notepad. Marcus nodded. "That's me. I wanted to check in and let you know that the driver has been taken into custody," the officer said. "We've gathered witness statements, and there's surveillance footage from the bus as well. You won't have to worry about him for a while." "Thank you," Marcus said, his voice steady but tinged with exhaustion. "I appreciate that." The officer gave a brief nod and turned to leave but paused. "By the way, if you'd like to file a formal complaint or pursue further action, let me know. Here's my card." Marcus took the card, glancing at the name, Officer Carter. He wasn't sure what his next steps would be, but he appreciated the gesture. As the officer walked away, Lee looked at Marcus. "Are you going to file a complaint?" "I don't know yet," Marcus admitted. "Part of me wants to just move on and forget about it, but another part of me knows that staying silent lets people like him think they can get away with it." Leah tilted her head thoughtfully. "If you ever need help or someone to back you up, let me know. I'll stand by you." Her offer surprised Marcus. They were strangers after all. But in that moment, her kindness felt like a lifeline. Over the next few days, the incident stuck with Marcus. He found himself replaying the moment over and over, not just the punch, but the looks from other passengers. Some had been outraged, their expressions mirroring Leah's compassion. Others had turned away, pretending not to see. He thought about the driver, too. What had made him so angry? Was it something Marcus had done? Or was it simply the color of his skin? These questions gnawed at him, but no clear answers came. At work, Marcus struggled to focus. He was a mechanic at a small auto shop, known for his meticulous attention to detail and calm demeanor. But even his coworkers noticed something was off. "Hey man, you good?" asked his friend and coworker, Darnell, as they worked on a car together. Marcus hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, just dealing with some stuff." Darnell raised an eyebrow. "Stuff like what? You're not usually this quiet." With a sigh, Marcus recounted the story, leaving out no details. By the time he finished, Darnell was shaking his head, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "Maybe not overnight," Darnell said. "But if no one speaks up, it definitely won't change. You've got to stand up for yourself, man. And you've got people who've got your back." Marcus appreciated Darnell's support, but he still wasn't sure. Filing a complaint meant reliving the incident, facing scrutiny, and possibly stirring up more trouble than it was worth. Yet deep down, he knew Darnell and Leah were right. That evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, staring at Officer Carter's card. He thought about the other passengers, the people who had spoken up in his defense. He thought about Leah's encouragement and Darnell's insistence. He wasn't just standing up for himself, he realized. He was standing up for anyone who had ever been treated unfairly and told to stay silent. With a deep breath, Marcus picked up his phone and dialed the number on the card. "That's messed up," Darnell said. "You can't just let this slide, Marcus. That guy needs to face the consequences." "I know," Marcus said, his voice heavy. "But it's not that simple. Even when people like him get called out, nothing really changes." Marcus's call to Officer Carter marked the beginning of a journey he hadn't expected. As the officer listened to his account, there was a mix of sympathy and understanding in his tone. "We'll look into it," Carter assured him. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." But even with the promise of investigation, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play. The driver hadn't acted out of thin air. There was something personal in his hostility, something Marcus couldn't put his finger on. Why him? Was it about race or something more? Days passed, and the questions lingered, feeding Marcus's unease. The story of the bus incident had made its way through the small community where he lived. News spread quickly, especially in places like this, where everyone knew everyone else. Some reached out with offers of support, while others avoided him, their discomfort evident. Marcus noticed the subtle glances people gave him when they thought he wasn't looking. Some avoided eye contact entirely. It wasn't just strangers on the street anymore. It was his coworkers, neighbors, and even friends from his childhood. The silence was deafening, and it gnawed at him. Lee had kept in touch after their conversation by the bus stop. They exchanged texts, often checking in on how each other was doing. Her support was genuine, and Marcus appreciated having someone who wasn't afraid to confront uncomfortable truths. But he couldn't help but wonder why she cared so much. One evening, as Marcus scrolled through his phone, he stumbled upon a post from Lee on social media. It was a picture of the bus with a caption that read, "No one should ever have to go through this." #Justice for Marcus. The post gained a surprising amount of traction, with dozens of comments offering solidarity and support. It wasn't just about Marcus anymore. People were talking, sharing their own stories of discrimination, moments they had kept buried. The driver wasn't just a man with anger, it was a symbol. A symbol that Marcus had become part of something much larger than himself. Marcus hadn't expected Leah's activism. It was clear now that her empathy ran deeper than he'd initially thought. But it also stirred something inside him, something he wasn't sure he was ready to confront. The more he saw her posts, the more questions arose. Was Lee trying to fix what had happened, or did she have her own motives? Was her activism genuine, or was there something else she wasn't saying? These thoughts consumed Marcus, leaving him torn between trusting someone who had shown him kindness and holding back from letting anyone else into his life. Meanwhile, Officer Carter's investigation uncovered something unexpected. The driver, it turned out, had a history of similar outbursts. Complaints had been filed against him before, but nothing substantial had ever come of them. It was clear that the system had failed to hold him accountable. The revelation angered Marcus, but didn't surprise him. What did surprise him was the discovery of a deeper connection. The driver wasn't just someone with a temper. He had ties to a local group known for their radical views. There were whispers, rumors about connections to a fringe ideology that preached hate and division. Marcus couldn't ignore the possibility that there was more to this story. The anger had been personal, but could it have roots that extended beyond a simple interaction on a bus? Was there something larger happening, something darker? The more Marcus dug, the more he realized that what he thought was a random act of violence might not have been random at all. The driver's connections hinted at a web of influence, one that stretched far beyond a single incident. As Marcus pieced together these fragments, he realized he wasn't just fighting against a man's actions, but against a system that had long ignored the roots of these issues. It wasn't just about seeking justice anymore. It was about confronting the reality that the problem wasn't isolated. It was systemic. Yet even as the pieces fell into place, there was a gnawing sense that something was still missing. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't the only one affected by this, and there were others who carried their own secrets. Leah's involvement felt like the key to understanding more. But was she part of the solution, or did she have her own agenda? Marcus wasn't sure. His trust was fragile, and the more he thought about it, the more uncertain he became. At the same time, the driver's influence didn't seem to be contained. Small incidents, whispers of similar encounters, began surfacing in the community. It was as if the hate had found new ways to fester, new channels to spread. Marcus knew he couldn't ignore it anymore. With each passing day, the stakes grew higher. Marcus's life had been forever changed by that one encounter. But it wasn't just his story anymore. It was everyone's. And as the lines between right and wrong blurred, Marcus couldn't help but wonder, was justice something you could truly achieve? Or was it just an illusion? A faint hope in a world that seemed intent on repeating its mistakes. The nights became harder for Marcus. Every creak of the floorboards in his apartment seemed louder, as if someone were always watching. Shadows on the walls cast unfamiliar shapes, making him jump at the slightest noise. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed, though there was no evidence to prove it. The unease that had settled deep within him refused to leave. One evening, as he was sitting at his kitchen table, there was a knock at the door. Marcus hesitated, his heart racing. He approached cautiously, his pulse quickening with each step. Through the peephole, he could see Leah standing there. Marcus hesitated a moment longer before opening the door. Marcus nodded, though his nerves were still frayed. "I've been busy," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's a lot happening." Leah took a deep breath, glancing around his apartment. "I've been digging deeper too. Something's not right. I can feel it." Marcus narrowed his eyes, his instincts on high alert. "What do you mean?" "I've traced the driver's connections," she said, her voice low. "They go beyond just him. There's a group, a network. I don't know the full scope, but it's bigger than we thought. And it's still active." Marcus felt a cold chill run down his spine. What kind of network? Lee hesitated before answering. "I don't have all the answers. But they've been linked to other incidents, things that never made the news. They've operated in the shadows, keeping a low profile, but now it feels like they're building up again." Marcus clenched his fists. "And you think they're coming after me?" Lee shook her head. "Not just you. They're targeting anyone who speaks out. They've been quiet for a while, but now—" She trailed off, her expression darkening. There was a long silence between them, filled only by the sound of their breathing. Marcus could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. He didn't trust easily, and Lee's revelation only deepened his doubts. But her determination was palpable, and part of him knew that walking away from this wasn't an option. The more they talked, the clearer it became. The driver wasn't acting alone. There was a web of influence, hidden but persistent, waiting for the right moment to strike again. The attacks weren't random, they were deliberate. And Marcus, now more than ever, felt the target on his back growing heavier. The next few days were a blur of restless nights and growing paranoia. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always nearby, watching, waiting. Even in the quiet moments, he couldn't relax. Every shadow, every sound, made him jump. One afternoon, he found himself at a local cafe, sitting in a corner booth. The place was nearly empty, just a few scattered patrons, but Marcus couldn't shake the sense of unease that had followed him all morning. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Lee. Asterisk, stay alert. They're watching. Asterisk. His stomach twisted as he read the message. Who asterisk they asterisk were, he wasn't sure. But he couldn't ignore the warning. As he stared at the phone, a shadow passed across his table. Marcus looked up, his breath catching in his throat. A man stood there, his expression cold, his gaze locked onto Marcus. The stranger didn't say a word, only stared. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't recognize the man, but something about him felt all too familiar. Slowly, he reached for his phone, typing out a quick response to Leah. Asterisk, they are here. Asterisk. Before he could finish the message, the man abruptly turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Fear gripped Marcus's throat as he realized the danger was no longer distant. It was right there, looming, and there was no way to run from it. Marcus sat there, his eyes darting around the cafe, scanning every face in the dim light. The man who had approached him was gone, swallowed by the crowd, leaving behind a lingering sense of dread. His pulse thudded in his ears, the silence of the cafe now oppressive. Who was that? Why did he feel like he knew him, even though he didn't? The feeling of being watched had become a constant companion, creeping into every corner of his mind. He couldn't escape it, no matter how hard he tried. As Marcus stared at his phone, the screen lit up again with another text from Leah *, be careful. They're closer than you think. Asterisk. His fingers trembled as he typed back, barely able to concentrate. Asterisk, I know. Something's wrong. Asterisk. But what could he do? The more he tried to unravel the mystery, the deeper he sank into the unknown. It wasn't just about confronting the driver anymore. It was about uncovering a web of secrets that stretched far beyond what he could see. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. His mind was consumed by the driver, the strangers who seemed to appear out of nowhere, and the growing sense that things were far from over. At some point, exhaustion took over, and he drifted into a restless sleep filled with fragmented dreams. He woke to a buzzing phone. This time, it wasn't a text from Leah. It was an unknown number. Marcus hesitated before answering. Marcus, a deep, unfamiliar voice said on the other end. The voice was calm, yet carried an unsettling edge. We need to talk. Marcus's heart leaped into his throat. Who is this? You don't need to know who I am, the voice replied. You only need to understand that you're asking questions you shouldn't be asking. That bus driver you encountered, he wasn't just a man with a temper. He's part of something much bigger. A network that's been operating in the shadows for years. Marcus gripped the phone tighter. What do you want from me? We're trying to keep this under control, the voice continued, but your persistence is making it harder. Back off or you'll find yourself in deeper than you ever imagined. Before Marcus could respond, the line went dead. His hands trembled as he stared at the phone, the silence deafening. The message was clear. Whoever this was, they weren't bluffing. The next morning, Marcus found himself at the auto shop, but the usual rhythm of his workday felt hollow. Darnell approached him, his expression concerned. Marcus, you okay? You look like you've barely slept. Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's been rough. Darnell narrowed his eyes, lowering his voice. You've got to be careful, man. Whatever this is, it's bigger than any of us realized. We're not just dealing with a few bad apples. There's something rotten beneath it all. Marcus nodded, grateful for Darnell's friendship, but his mind was far from the conversation. The warning from the unknown caller played over and over in his head. Back off. How could he? That evening, as he locked the door to his apartment, he noticed something strange. A shadow passed by his window. Slowly, cautiously, he approached, peeking through the blinds. There was nothing there, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him from the darkness. The following day, as Marcus returned to work, Darnell pulled him aside, his expression grim. Something's happening. People are disappearing, Marcus. Not just anyone, but those who've been digging into this network. One by one, they're vanishing. Marcus's stomach tightened. Disappearances. Darnell nodded. No reports, no leads, just silence. Marcus felt a cold wave wash over him. Was the driver part of this? And if so, where did it end? That night, Marcus couldn't shake the fear that had become his constant companion. He had made a choice to dig deeper, to confront the truth, but it seemed like the deeper he went, the more dangerous things became. The answers were out there, somewhere, but the price of finding them might be too high. The weight of Carter's words hung in the air like a thunderstorm, each syllable striking Marcus with force. "Someone you know," Carter had said. But who? The questions echoed in his mind, growing louder with each passing second. Marcus felt his legs weaken beneath him, his entire body trembling. How could someone close to him be tied to something so dark, so dangerous? The thought was almost impossible to comprehend, yet the evidence was right there, staring him in the face. "You've got to be kidding," Marcus managed to whisper, his voice cracking. Carter didn't answer immediately. His gaze was distant, lost in the memories of what they had uncovered. "We've traced their movements, their connections," Carter finally said. "It's not just one person, Marcus. It's a web. And someone close to you, someone you thought was trustworthy, has been at the center of it." Marcus felt his breath hitch. His mind raced, searching for answers. Was it someone from his past? Someone he had trusted without question? The idea sent a wave of panic through him. "Who?" Marcus demanded, his voice rising. "Who is it?" Carter hesitated again, his lips tightening as he debated whether or not to reveal more. "We found evidence pointing to someone within your circle," he said at last. "But we're still piecing everything together. Whoever they are, they've kept their identity hidden, until now." Marcus clenched his fists, his head spinning. The people behind these threats weren't just distant figures from his past. They were right there, closer than he ever imagined. Could it really be someone he trusted, someone who had been walking by his side all along? Carter placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, his expression softer now, though still heavy with gravity. "You need to be careful, Marcus. If they've come this far, it's not just about intimidation anymore. They won't stop until they've destroyed everything in their path." Marcus took a deep breath, his chest tight. He wanted to ask more, demand answers, but the uncertainty was paralyzing. He couldn't trust anyone now, especially not the person Carter had hinted at. "Where do we start?" Marcus finally asked, his voice steadier but laced with doubt. Carter shook his head, his expression hardening again. "They'll be watching. We need to find out what they're planning next, and fast. But whatever it is, it won't come without a fight." Marcus knew he couldn't run from this. The past was catching up to him, and the only way out was through. But as he thought about the person Carter had mentioned, a chilling realization hit him. Someone he once saw as an ally might have been the very one pulling the strings all along. The darkness wasn't just outside anymore. It was inside him, weaving through the lives of everyone he cared about. And as the sirens faded into silence, Marcus knew this was only the beginning of a battle he couldn't afford to lose. Marcus spent the next few days following Carter's advice. Every moment was filled with uncertainty and fear. He couldn't trust anyone, not fully, not anymore. The person they had hinted at being the leader of this network remained a mystery. But the more Marcus thought about it, the clearer it became. There were only a few people in his life who could have been capable of something like this. Darnell had stood by him, trying to make sense of it all, but even his usual support felt distant now. Every conversation was tinged with unease. Marcus didn't want to believe that someone he trusted had been pulling strings in the shadows, but the evidence was mounting. The leader wasn't some unknown figure from the past. It was someone he knew, someone he'd never suspected. Late one evening, after a long day of digging through old records and following clues, Marcus sat alone in his apartment. The silence was deafening, and the weight of the unresolved questions pressed down on him. He needed answers, but the truth was hard to face. How could someone he trusted betray him like this? Then, as he stared at his phone, it buzzed again. An unknown number. Marcus hesitated before answering, his heart pounding. "Marcus," a familiar voice greeted him, calm and measured. It wasn't masked or cold like before. This voice was different, but it still sent shivers down his spine. "Who is this?" Marcus demanded, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hand. "It's me, Marcus," the voice said. "It's been a long time." Marcus's breath hitched. It wasn't the voice of a stranger, but someone from his past, a figure whose name had been a constant reminder of everything he'd lost. "Why?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you do this?" "I had to," the voice replied. "You don't understand. We were fighting for something bigger than you could ever imagine. They were destroying everything, everyone, and I couldn't let it happen." Marcus closed his eyes, the memories flooding back. This was someone who had been there through everything, the good times, the bad. How could they have fallen so far? "You could have told me," Marcus said, his voice rising in anger and confusion. "You could have trusted me." "I did trust you," the voice said, almost pleading. "But things changed. You wouldn't have understood the stakes." Marcus clenched his fists, his heart racing. The betrayal felt raw, deeper than he could have imagined. And now, what happens now? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Now we finish what we started. But you have to be ready. It's bigger than you or me now. We can't stop until it's over." The line went silent, leaving Marcus with more questions than answers. The person on the other end had been a part of this web all along, someone he had once trusted with everything. The following days were a blur of fear and preparation. Marcus wasn't sure who he could trust anymore. The world had shifted, and everything he once knew was different. He spent hours trying to piece together the fragments of his life, the pieces of a puzzle that kept slipping through his fingers. As the final confrontation drew closer, Marcus knew there was no turning back. Whatever had started in the shadows was about to come to light. He could only hope he had the strength to face it. The night of the final confrontation arrived, and Marcus stood alone in a dimly lit alley, his heart pounding in his chest. The silence stretched out, broken only by his shallow breaths. He knew they were coming. They always did. In the distance, headlights flickered, cutting through the darkness. A vehicle approached, and Marcus's breath caught in his throat. The past and the present were about to collide. As the car came to a halt, the doors swung open, and figures emerged from the shadows. Marcus recognized one of them immediately. His mind screamed in recognition, but his body felt numb. "You shouldn't be here," the figure said, their voice cold and distant. Marcus took a step forward, his resolve steadying. "Neither should you." The confrontation that followed wasn't about answers anymore. It was about truth and accountability. Marcus had to confront the reality of betrayal and the weight of those he had once trusted. The battle wasn't just against those who had sought to destroy him, it was also against those who had hidden in plain sight. When the dust settled, Marcus stood alone in the silence. The fight was over, but the scars remained. The network had been dismantled, but the people who had been part of it were forever changed. Trust had been broken, and some wounds ran too deep to heal. In the end, Marcus learned that the darkest battles are often fought within, and sometimes the hardest truths are the ones we never see coming. He emerged from the shadows, not as the same person, but as someone who had been forever shaped by what he had endured. As he walked away from the ruins of his past, Marcus knew that while the struggle had ended, the lessons would remain. Life, in all its complexity, wasn't about finding simple answers. It was about learning to live with the questions that never fade.